Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov was born on the 18th of May 1868 in Pushkin. He was the eldest of 5 children. His grandfather, who was a Tsar at the time, Tsar Alexander II, and the Romanov bloodline had actually spanned all across Europe, from the Kaiser to King George V to even the King of Belgium. All knew each other very well, and they were actually cousins and cousins-in-law. Even his mother was actually a former princess of Denmark. It was actually a quiet and a bit isolated life for him, but life soon changed forever when in 1881 his grandfather was assassinated, and his father became Alexander III, and Nicholas became the heir to the throne at age 12. He studied law in St. Petersburg and actually attended military school and graduated as a general. And then in 1894 he would be forever changed again, and once his father died of liver failure, despite going to law and military school, he knew nothing about government affairs and was wishful thinking that his father would actually teach him to rule like a proper Tsar, but he died prematurely, leaving Nicholas to figure out how to be a Tsar on his own. So in the 1900s, he married Queen Victoria's granddaughter, Alex von Hissing, who changed her name to Alexandra Fedorovna, and had 5 children, 4 girls and 1 boy, Alexei, heir to the throne, born in 1904. Nicholas was absolute ruler, a strong believer in divine right and very conservative man. His policies were very non-progressive, unlike his father and grandfather before him. Russia was in need of economic and agricultural reforms, and there was no legal certainty in Russia, no parliament, no constitution, and when the middle and lower class actually tried to rise up and demand any sort of rights, his police force would repress and crack down on them, and he used the dreadful honor to hunt down and arrest political opponents. And there was also a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment in Russia, leading to many pogroms from 1903 to 1906. In 1905, the Russians went to war with Japan and lost severely. That sparked the 1905 revolution, and many people were killed after the marches and protests on the Winter Palace. But the people got their way with basic civil rights and made a state Duma, and that happened through Nicholas. But basically, Nicholas had full control and an indirect way by limiting the universal suffrage to the wealthy and withholding funds from the Duma, making the cabinet very loyal and only loyal to his conservative policies. So now, World War I. Now the great powers were geared up for war, but the Russian military elites were actually on holiday, and even Brusilov himself was on holiday, but he was willing to support his fellow Slav nation, and the French had their back. If Germany attacked, they were off to war. They had to fight against his cousin Wilhelm, Willy, in the west and the Austrians in the southwest. The early weeks of the war was a disaster for Russia, when they were double the numbers of the French in the first 3 weeks of their attacks on the Germans, and with great losses at the Masurian Lakes and Tannenberg. The Russians did rebound, however, in the winter, defeating the Turks at Sarikamish, and the Austro-Hungarians were nearly destroyed, but the Germans reinforced their line, and the last spring and early summer offensive of 1915 broke the Russian lines, taking huge chunks from Russia, which shocked Russia, and despite his advisors saying not to, Nicholas made himself the supreme commander of the Russian army on the 5th of September 1915, which was possibly the greatest mistake of his reign. He removed Grand Duke Nikolai from command, which paralyzed the Russian army with low ammunition, weapons and food. Anyway, though he didn't actually plan any offensive or defensives and actually let the generals do their job, while he was in Belarus holding the line, he left political and governmental affairs in the hands of his wife, which was influenced by Rasputin, who told her to dismiss ministers and grinded the government to a halt. The harsh winter of late 1916 and early 1917 made it worse. The 2 revolutions, the February Revolution and the October Revolution, had destabilized Russia, and the Bolsheviks chanted "Land, peace and bread," and it rang through the desperate Russian ears. It didn't help that a terrible image, though, made it worse by the Soviets and the provisional government, calling Nikolai a failure in the fields, and Alexei von Hessing, or Alexandra Fedorovna, a German spy under Rasputin, and thought that he was assassinated in 1916, but that didn't help the image. He finally gave up his throne, and his cousin Nikolai didn't even want it, maybe because of all the revolution and the hatred for the Tsars was in the air, but he didn't take it, and 300 years of Romanov dynasty from Alexander the Great to Ivan the Terrible and even Catherine the Great was finished. They were taken into custody and moved several times, even though they pleaded for their cousin King George to move them to England, but that failed, and they were shot along with his wife, children, butler, maids, and even the family dog, all killed, and it remained a state secret for many years after the killings. People though only knew Nicholas was killed after 1925. A controversial man, even by the Kaiser and King George standards. Maybe like Franz Joseph, the last ruler of the old school. He wasn't as bad as people made him out to be because of the Soviets wanted to make people hate him, but he didn't fit and forced into any czarist role. He had no formal teaching on how to be a czar, and his grandfather and father died under the revolutionary stress and assassinations at the time, so he was looking out for his own safety. It wasn't a stretch to keep revolutionaries on the wrap, but these specials, I answer the question, what would you have done? Learn something, my dudes.